Welcome back to the Delve podcast. I'm Allie. I'm a staff therapist here at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
And I'm Adam, the executive and clinical director and a clinical psychologist at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
Yeah, here at Delve, we offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy. If you want to reach out to us, you can find us at our website, delvepsych.com, DELVEPSYCH.com. And also go check out our Substack. We're talking about a lot of really interesting topics over there. Again, same spelling, delvepsych.substack.com.
Yeah.
So Adam, what are we getting into today?
Heartbreak and loss,
loneliness,
and the depths of our sorrows.
Such a relatable topic that I feel like everyone has experienced, and a lot of people seek therapy for this very topic.
Yeah, that was partially the impetus. Was I was noticing how often we are meeting clients for the first time. This being the first time that they come to therapy, the impetus for them beginning often is that they're going through a breakup, and and I think there's really good information, really good evidence about how to get through a breakup. But I don't think it's really talked about. I think there's so much conversation about how to stay in a relationship, how to find a partner, but I don't find people talking in the lay people talking as much about the healing process and what it really requires to do it well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like a lot of people after a breakup are just kind of floundering, not really sure where to go from there, judging themselves for how they are or aren't getting over their relationship and how they're dealing with it, and like just having a really difficult time. I would agree that I think in like there isn't common knowledge as for like how to do this, how to move on and move forward in a healthy way. What do you feel like? You said there's a lot of good research as to how to do this well. Like, what have you found?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I think there's a lot out there overall, so it might be hard to distill, but I do think we can visit a number of topics today. Some of the ones that I wanted to maybe get into are things like relating to your own emotional pain, some questions on distance, some questions on moving on and dating others, emotions, thoughts, stories, your social circle, and time. Those are some of the major categories I'm thinking of. What do you think, though? What else seems important to you, if anything?
Oh my gosh, that's a lot. It's a lot of different areas to get into. And I think just honoring the grieving process seems important to me in all of this. Not just like what was, but like all the excitement of like what could have been, what you were looking forward to with this person, and like the life that you were building with this person. It's so much more than just like the relationship itself, but like everything around it and like your identity in it.
Yeah.
It's really heavy.
Right. And when I think about the way that our identities can end up growing in a relationship, and elements of our identity can kind of weave themselves into a relationship, then I think a lot of the healing that we have to do is kind of reimagining who we are, reimagining who we are in this next era, but also reimagining the narrative that we had about the former relationship and the stories we were telling ourselves and the directions that we thought we might be heading in the future. I think those are critical elements to beginning the process. And remaking those stories is a deeply painful process. But I do think that with all the things we're going to talk about today, I think that if you are willing to go through the pain, and I would ask you to be willing because it's going to be there anyway, if you're willing to go through the emotional pain of it, then all of these experiences of pain are growth promoting. If you had an idea of yourself, were confronted with a challenging situation, realized that you needed to make a change or a change was made for you, and then you reconstruct an identity, you're going to be a different, stronger, more agile, emotionally agile person at the end of that. You kind of can't walk out of that without having learned some things and grown in some ways. And same with stories, to have had hope and built around that, but then lost that hope, maybe lost that direction, but then been able to experience the pain of that, reconstruct and move forward. That is growth. And every time we do that, we get better at doing that. Every time you have to go through that, painful as it is, that is where change comes from. Change doesn't happen when you're comfortable. Change happens when you're deeply uncomfortable. And the Stoics had this idea of amor fati, kind of love your fate. If you can love the fact that this pain is helping you grow, that you will be better and stronger at the other end of it, then it can help in the moment that you're experiencing the pain. It can help you to have some solace in it. I feel terrible right now, but I'm not always going to feel terrible. And I will get better at feeling terrible, and I'll be better able to tolerate feeling terrible, which then makes you successful, more successful in all of the other areas of life too.
Wow, what an interesting concept. And I feel it definitely requires, though, somebody being willing to really feel that pain and sit in that pain. And that's kind of the kicker, is I feel like a lot of people aren't willing to, are resistant to really feeling all of the feelings, and instead like distracting or wanting to just like replace with, you know, some other person, some other feeling, and yeah, and not deal with what needs to be dealt with for the growth to happen.
So how do we usually see people trying to go about the distracting, the compartmentalizing, the replacing? What do we usually see them do?
Yeah, it could be perhaps just getting right into the dating game, just more maybe casual relationships afterwards, even if that's not like their ultimate goal, like that's not what they want ultimately, but just to like replace sort of like those feelings of loneliness and emptiness, perhaps even drinking more often, to kind of numb that pain. Yeah, what do you see as well?
I think those are the things, and I think seeing people distracting with friends or trips or new hobbies, other relationships, etc. And I think if so, let me give two paths here, maybe even three examples. But I could imagine one situation where, let's say, Janet, after a relationship ends, picks up a new hobby, spends all her time on it, is hanging out with her friends constantly, doesn't really think about her ex, doesn't do any form of kind of therapy or anything of that nature, isn't dating, and doesn't really explore what happened in any way. I would argue that while on the surface it looks like, yeah, Janet, that she's out there living her life, she's picked up a new hobby, look at her go. I would argue that we've sort of missed some of the critical steps, which are like, you have to engage the emotionality. So I could give you an alternative path. Let's say, let's go Charlotte. So Charlotte maybe does get back into dating a little bit more quickly, and more in a casual sense, is still really sad about what happened in the former relationship, but does spend some time thinking, talking, processing, writing, etc. And she sort of runs in both paths. So she's also dating and also distracting a little bit, etc. But then does make time to process what happened, think about it, rebuild, and reconstruct. I would argue Charlotte's doing better there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like on the surface, it seems like Janet's the one like, wow, she's doing great. She doesn't even care. She's just not even thinking about her ex. But I wonder how Janet would be eventually when she does take a stab at dating again, like how much she hasn't confronted and hasn't dealt with versus Charlotte is still taking the time to process how she's feeling and sit in it all the while dating. And that in itself, I know you talk about like is not necessarily a bad thing to date when you're not necessarily quote unquote ready or enough time has passed, quote unquote. Like I think there's this idea that we talk about of like an intentional break. And like what are you doing within that break? Are you actually processing, reflecting, growing? Or are you just letting time pass for time passing's sake? Because then that's not really doing anything. Like,
Right. Yeah. So a break from dating. If you have a big goal of finding a long-term romantic partner, or even multiple partners over a long period of time, whatever your goal is, if it's connected to the idea of finding people and getting close to them in a romantic way, then I would also say on the surface, taking a break is inconsistent with the goal. There are times when you need to, just because other, what we would call kind of transient needs come into play, and they become more important than the goal pursuit in a temporary way. But the thing that I always ask my clients to articulate if they're going to take a break from dating is, how does taking a break from dating set you up to be more successful, or at least continue to head in the direction of your big goal, which, a common big goal is to find a long-term romantic partner? How does taking a break help you find a romantic partner? That's not to say it doesn't, and I'm not suggesting that one shouldn't take a break. Very much do take a break, but taking a break mindlessly will tend to make the break less effective. Dating mindlessly will tend to make the dating less effective. So don't just date, do it on purpose. Don't just break, do it on purpose. That's really much more the principle here.
right. It's all about intention. Um, so what was that first aspect of healing from a breakup that you mentioned? Or where do you want to start in that list of things that you mentioned?
Yeah, I was thinking about the idea of distance. So what do we tend to hear in the, what do we want to call it? Like the pop psych world? What are the kind of framings on distance after a breakup? Distance from the person that you were dating.
What do we tend to hear?
Yeah.
That you need to cut off all contact immediately and go your separate ways and never talk again.
Right. You're dead to me, block them, out they go.
Yeah, pretend it never happened.
Right.
Yes.
Head down, move forward.
That's generally the zeitgeist. Yeah.
Yeah, I find people really struggle with that. And it's not uncommon for me to hear, we broke up, I'm never talking to him again. I mean, okay, fine, we did just hook up on Saturday, but it's like,
right. No, and I understand, because it's like, this was the person that you talked to every single day. This was like one of your main supports in life. And so to kind of cut off cold turkey can be very difficult. It's such a major shift.
right. And I think that we underestimate, this will get into attachment stuff a bit, but I think we have done too little to communicate to the public just how profound a psychological force attachment dynamics are. I want to look up these authors' names. It's the people who wrote Attached. It's Heller and something. Pardon me if you hear typing. Oh, Levine and Heller. So in their book Attached, firstly, I mean, I think it's an excellent book. I think it's oversimplifying some extremely complicated dynamics. with respect to what we really know about attachment theory. And I think when anytime psychological theory reaches the mainstream, reaches pop psych level, there can be an immediate skepticism of it. So you sort of get people in two camps: the camp that thinks the Myers-Briggs is awesome, and the camp that thinks the Myers-Briggs is basically Harry Potter houses. So I think a similar thing happened with attachment. As this book got very popular and a lot of people were reading it, people broke into a couple of different camps. They're like, I don't know, this sounds like it might be junk psych. And another camp saying like, no, this is the answer. Let me reveal a little bit. The attachment theory is one of the most well-validated theories that I think psychology has ever really come across. I think Bowlby, followed by Ainsworth, followed by a whole host of researchers, have made an extremely strong case for how attachment works in the brain. And it is really complicated. We should probably do a whole podcast on it at some point. I will say that the book Attached is oversimplifying. They have to. They're not doing anything wrong by oversimplifying. They had to deliver it to a popular audience, and I'm grateful that they did. It is more complicated than that, and I'm sure if I talked to them, they would agree. But I think they did a great job of communicating the way that it works broadly. And one of the key parts of it is that, like, I almost imagine your neurons are kind of gluing themselves to the other person, or gluing themselves to the concept of the other person. And so when you're trying to distance from them, I want you to imagine that you're taking, like, you've super glued a large part of your brain to another thing, and you're needing to kind of like slowly scrape that away from the thing that it's attached to, like bit by little bit, day after day after day. It is an arduous, painstaking process. And you ever have that situation when you're doing something like that, and all of a sudden the like some part of what you had peeled off resticks itself to the surface that and you're like, yeah, I already did that part. Same thing here. It's like you're stuck in that kind of quite literally attached kind of way, attached to the concept, and prying those attachments away, prying those kind of points of contact away from it is slow and hard.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like just that visual brought up such a visceral reaction in me, just like scraping your brain away from someone else's. And I don't think that we realize that that's what we're doing, essentially. That's what's happening, like, in our brains as we're going through this breakup. Yeah.
And so, like, with distance, you need that distance, because the closer it is to that point of contact, the more it's going to restick itself. That's why, answering that text, making that phone call is a resetting of the process. You're quite literally resetting the glue. You're resetting the stuckness every single time you do that. I do think that immediately after a breakup, there is a period of what I would call kind of post-mortem, where everybody's making sense of things and trying to answer questions. And I think a gift that you can offer to someone that you are distancing from is to answer questions. What happened? Was I reading this correctly? I think those questions need to be asked graciously and openly, and I think there's a right to decline to answer. I think the more complicated, the more painful, especially if there was patterns of abuse or caustic kind of actions happening in the relationship, I think more distance is probably going to be better than more questions. You have to be careful with the post-mortem phase, because you're not trying to reattach. You're not trying to fix. You're trying to make sense. It's meaning making, which is the theme we'll probably come back to today. If you are talking about things as a way of making meaning of what happened, I think that's generally okay, as long as all parties involved are doing so in a thoughtful and caring way. Um, I think if it's getting into trying to fix, trying to coerce, trying to convince, just stop and get some distance. And there will be that day, you're sitting around on a Thursday night when you and whoever used to hang out, and you're like, I'm just going to text them. That's the point of contact. That's the moment of growth. That's the peeling away right there. And I would argue that that's a great place to begin to engage your broader network, which could be maybe the next thing that we talk about.
Yeah. It's such an important visual that like anytime you decide, okay, I'm just gonna like reach out one more time, or I'm just gonna, text them and ask them how they're doing, or I'll text them happy birthday. What's the harm? Like you're re-sticking a little bit, and you have to re-scrape that part of your way again.
Yeah.
But it sounds like from your perspective, you're taking a slight change to sort of the hard and fast, like immediately no contact, never talk again. It's more of like you can have some of those closure conversations, make meaning of what happened, but there has to come a point where you do have that heartbreak. Yes? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think it's valuable. I think there's a lot of conversation about like, how do I keep them as a friend in my life? And I love the impetus. I understand why people want that. I would just say, have the heartbreak, make there be distance between, this is heuristic, this isn't science, but like my personal opinion is that I think that having that heartbreak ensures that there is a clear distinction between the period in which we were a romantic thing and the period in which we're now friends again. And I usually find that in that period, there is a lot of personal growth that just happens in the time itself. So sometimes you have that 3-month or 6-month break and you discover like, I don't actually think I do want that friendship anymore. And sometimes you are still thinking about them and you do need that. Or maybe not need, but you do desire that ongoing contact. With the break and then some intentionality about how we step back into the friendship, that can work. I will say circumstance matters a lot here. So, I mean, situations where two people within a friend group end up connecting romantically and then breaking up does make it harder respective to that broader friend group. So things like that can make things challenging. Divorce can make things challenging because we're quite literally in court dealing with hard negotiations constantly. But I think if you could follow the general principles, like let's take the court situation. I have to go to court. I have to negotiate with my ex. As much of that as you can put on your lawyer, you do. As much of that as you can compartmentalize and kind of follow the main principles, you do. But those circumstances will affect what you're able to do, but they won't dictate completely what you must do. So there are still ways to take distance, move on, move forward, process emotions, follow the principles, not the exact script.
Yeah, I think that's also so important. So in those moments when you're feeling extra lonely, like let's say it is the Thursday night that you usually have your date night with your now ex, and you're trying to resist reaching out to text them, what do you do instead? How do you handle that? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you have a number of options, and all of the things that one can do to manage their emotions are an option on the table. But one of the ones I want to call out in the moment is if the broad impetus is I want to reach out to someone, or I want to reach out to this person and talk, then reach out to someone and talk. Which is also why I think it is foundationally important to make sure that you have a social network while you're in a relationship. My dear fellows, my fellow cishet men, struggle with this most, I think, when this has been evidenced in the research. I don't have a citation in front of me, but I've read a paper in the past that did indicate that the longer and deeper that a man tends to be in a cishet relationship, the smaller his social circle gets, which isn't necessarily evidenced for people of other genders. And I think we need to be very, very careful about that. I think that is a major pillar of the experience of adult male loneliness. That we're making our world smaller. Many men are turning their wives into their therapists, and it puts a lot of additional strain on this other person that can often create cracks and fissures in a relationship. So no matter how secure you are, how busy you are, how whatever you are, I think it is important to continue to build out that social circle while you are in a relationship, while you are looking for a new relationship, and while you're, I suppose, at all stages.
100%. I will always advocate that clients build out the rest of their lives when they're in a relationship, because you really never know. You never know what's going to happen, no matter how secure you feel. And even if the relationship is the most secure relationship you've ever been in, for those moments that you do have an argument with your partner, like, who are you going to go to? Are you just going to wait once a week to see your therapist to talk about it with them? Like, you know,
quit making it our problem.
It's like you absolutely need other people. You need other supports, and it is really interesting to me that the research has sort of found that it's a sort of a phenomenon that's like specific to cis hetero men. I do think that women as well experience that very thing, but it's just interesting that the numbers show that, like, with men specifically, it seems to be more prominent. Yeah.
We need to be careful getting too much into the statistic stuff, because I'll pop off. But I will briefly say, I think that's one of the interesting things about reading statistics in research broadly, that trends aren't necessarily universalities, but the way that we talk about them is as if they are. And so you could say, here's a common argument. You could say cishet men tend to do this thing. They tend to have a smaller social circle. So then you point to an example. Well, Brian hasn't done that. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not how a trend works. And then also the example you bring up, we also have the flip side of it, which is like, no, I think women can experience that too. Absolutely, absolutely true. And I think that's part of what makes stats so confusing, is that they're not universals. They are they can speak to trends. They also can be deeply misrepresented. And then I've got much more I could say on this at some point. I don't know how much our listener wants to hear me complain about effect sizes, but if ever we want to go there,
do a whole podcast on statistics if you'd like. But
that one might get skipped in the feed. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's say this person, they find themselves, they have friends that they go to, in those moments where they feel extra lonely and they need extra support. But they're still feeling really, really down and affected by the end of this relationship. You kind of talked about needing to sit and process everything you're feeling, not running away from it, not distracting from it. How do we do that exactly?
There you go. That's a great question, Allie. Thank you. So I think this gets into two pieces that I think are the crux, really the crux of healing. Again, follow the principles here. Don't follow the exact prescription. But the principles are emotions and processing. The way that I like to do this, the way that I like to kind of help people do it, if they've got any kind of penchant for writing, is to write. And what specifically do we write? If you just start stream of consciousness writing about what happened or what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, people can kind of bounce into a few different directions. But usually what you'll see in the stream of consciousness writing, or even when in the ruminations that they talk about as they're activated about a past breakup, you'll see that it bounces in a lot of different directions. And as it bounces in a lot of different directions, a keen listener can spot certain themes, certain either big ideas, or, if you will, like kind of emotion stems. Like the two most common ones that I see almost always, that I think are all probably near universal in any breakup, would be anger and longing. I miss them, I want them back, and damn it, I'm so pissed at them. So if we were to just take those two and partial those out, then what you could do is you could start with the stream of consciousness writing or ruminating, whatever, but try to notice and hear what big themes and big emotion blocks are happening. You're probably going to hear anger. You're probably going to hear longing. And so now we do this thing called partialing, also a statistical term. But partialing is to kind of peel those off into their own sections. And if you want to process, you're usually going to want to dive into that specific block, that specific kind of concept, and just stay there. So if I'm talking about anger, if I'm thinking about anger, if I'm writing about anger, stay in anger. Don't tell me about the longing. Now is not the nice letter that says the nice things, and my gosh, I'm going to miss you, and didn't we have such great times together? We're in the angry letter. Why the hell did you do this? That doesn't mean that this is rational. It doesn't mean that it's your final thought. It doesn't mean that these are your real beliefs. Also, dearest listener, do not send this writing to anyone. Don't write this angry ass letter and then send it to them. What? No. You
No,
write
it's
it
for
and
you.
you burn it. You burn it in the backyard. Fire
Yeah.
safety. Fire safety. But anyway, so if you're angry, write the angry letter or narrative. If you're longing, then don't talk about the anger. I'm so angry with you that you aren't allowing us to be together. That's not the place for this. Speak fondly about the person that you cared for. It's a kind of what we call dialectics, to sort of say, there are multiple pieces to this puzzle. I'm just going to focus on one piece. I'm just going to focus on just that piece. And personally, this also does mandate that there is a willingness to spend time with the emotions themselves. You're willing to be angry. You're willing to miss the person and long for them. And you might not be in a place where you're ready for that at all moments in time. But if you pay attention to how you're feeling and where you're at in the process, there will come a time when you start to feel the anger more than the longing. Okay, right. Angry. Then there will come a time when you're going to feel the sadness and the loss and the longing more than you feel the anger. Then write about that then. I'm using the word right. You could do this in a lot of different ways. If you want to finger paint it, as long as it's getting into the emotion, then find your way into the emotion. But I find that humans are language wielding creatures. It's it's probably our favorite tool in all the tools that we've, as little hominids, have ever used. So use it and wield it with great authority.
Yeah. So essentially what we're doing is we are picking one of the strong emotions that we feel like we're experiencing within this breakup, choosing it, committing to that one, and really delving deep into that emotion, all the depths of just that one emotion.
Right.
And then we set that letter aside, we burn it, whatever we want to do with it. And then we pick the other one that we're feeling and do the same thing.
In principle, one little caveat is I usually find I don't ask people to immediately destruct the letter. I actually want you to keep it for a while, because after you write it the first time, I'd love for you to revisit it any other time those emotions come up. So let's say it's that Thursday night, you end up writing the angry letter. And then Sunday, you're feeling angry again. Go pick up the angry letter and read it again. and edit it. Add little pieces. You'd be like, you know what? And now I remember, you remember what happened with your brother? Oh man, that really got to me. So now we're going to write that in there too. Notes in the margins, keep editing, make it a living document, spend time with it. Even better if you do this with a therapist, by the way, because I think a therapist is usually going to have a good, keen eye for the parts that you're glossing over, the parts where you're being a bit of an apologist. That external view can be very, very valuable here. But if you don't have access to a therapist, you probably have access to a therapist because you're probably listening to this podcast, and we probably have somebody who could help. But anyway, if you don't have access to a therapist, then I think it is possible to do this kind of work alone. Small tangent, though, I will say, if traumatic or abusive things were happening in that past relationship, that's a time when I would say work with a therapist. It's a lot to take on by yourself, and there's a very specific way that we tend to work with survivors of abuse and trauma in relationships. So that's a bit of a different category than what we've talked about so far. But otherwise, I think that it's okay to get into the emotion, to explore it yourself, and to keep spending time with it. Eventually, you'll find that as you're reading and rereading and rereading and rewriting this letter, it starts to, I mean, it's never less important, but it just seems to matter less in a weird way.
Yeah, I've seen you work, and there's this idea that there are clients that are wanting to write the letter and send it to the person. Like, I really feel the need to like tell this person how I feel and how angry they made me and how they slighted me. And I've seen you be like, great, I want you to write the letter first and just sit on it for a bit. Don't send it right away. Just sit on it. And after you write the letter and get everything out, then see if you still have that urge to want to send it, because I bet that urge has changed.
Yeah. And change is the operative word there. It does. Sometimes people find a strength in their conviction. They're like, nah, I'm sending it. I was like, all right, well, I can't stop you. But yeah, I think that's such an important aspect in it. Thank you for remembering that.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really helpful, because I feel a lot of times when we send that letter to that person, we don't exactly get the ideal response that we want from them. Actually, more often than not, I think we don't get the response that we want.
Because if we did, we probably wouldn't be breaking up.
Right. So I think more than anything else, like, writing this is for you to get this out. Right. As much as you feel like it's like, no, he needs to hear this, or she needs to hear this, and how she did this to me.
They won't hear. They won't hear. They don't want to hear.
They won't hear it in the way that you want them to.
Typically not. And by the way, there will be exceptions to that rule. You will send the thing and the person's like, my gosh, you're right, I see it. That's not the norm, and it's probably not the thing to aim for.
Yeah, this is about your healing journey and your healing process. And I just too want to emphasize the importance of, like, whether it is like writing or like artistically drawing this out or whatever, but just getting it out of your head, so it's not just like these thoughts aren't just like swimming in your head and you're just ruminating. Like, it definitely changes once you get it down on a page, get it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the ways that our brain lies to us all the time, but one of the ways that it lies to us is it gives us a confidence in the concreteness of the ideas that we have bouncing around in our heads. But if you ever listen to somebody who's trying to explain a new or a big idea that they've just come across, especially if it's got a lot of emotional content to it, as you and I do every day at work, it comes out in these like messy, confused, whatever kind of ways. And they've got such a, like, I'm really struggling to say what I'm trying to say here, which has this idea of like, it's so clear in my head, but I can't get it out. And what we find is that there's two major language centers in the brain. One is called Broca's area. The other one's called Wernicke's area. And Broca's area specifically seems to be heavily implicated in language production. What we seem to have strong evidence for at this point is that getting thoughts that are kind of swimming around in your mind through Broca's area changes and solidifies and concrete congeals, that's the word I want, the idea itself. So there is an ephemeral quality to the ideas that are just living in our heads. Even though they feel concrete, our brain is lying to us about how concrete it is. And to lay down the idea, you have to get it out of Broca's area somehow. We also have evidence that talking does that. And writing does that. Writing seems to still be what we would call mediated by Broca's area. Anybody who knows, by the way, the neuroscience of this at a deeper level than I do, by all means, please comment. I know it's somewhat well, but not nearly as well as some neuropsychologists that I work with. So feel free to comment and correct the record on any of this. But I think you want to get it to go through Broca's area. You want it to be eventually, no matter how you process, eventually you're going to need to make sense of it in a languagey kind of way, because language is important to humans. Even if it's, I painted this finger painting, let me tell you about it. Let me tell you what it's representing, or let me tell you what it means to me. That can be enough, but the meaning is going to come through language eventually. It's just an innate element of humanity.
Yeah, 100%. And like, again, why I think just the concept of talk therapy is so important, because like people underestimate the power of just saying the things that we're thinking and feeling. Just, yeah.
Absolutely.
It out loud to another person. It literally changes the thing. So
yeah. I completely agree. I want to say that when you are talking with somebody who is grieving a loss like this, the thoughts that they have, you'll notice a repetition of thought. And if you're supporting somebody while they are going through this, one of the most powerful things you can do is just notice, like, I keep hearing you say, blah. I think when you're trying to support somebody who's going through a breakup, there's such an urge to fix. There's such an urge to get them out of it. There's such an urge to get them through it. And more than anything, sitting with them while they process, or sitting with them while they ruminate, can be extremely powerful, because it communicates that you're not alone. But if you're trying to be additional to that, noticing the themes, noticing the emotions, and noticing the refrains, if you will, the repetition of thought, can be really helpful to somebody even knowing what to write about and knowing how to process. So one of my favorite rom-coms of all time is the movie Forget Paris. If they, without spoiling the ending, if there is ever a time in which they need to grieve the loss of a relationship, and Paris was so central to it, you're probably going to need to write and talk and think about what happened in Paris and why you fell in love in the first place and what it seemed like at the time. And so you might then be sitting across from that person, and they'll say something like, I remember us walking along the Champs-Élysées, or whatever. I can never pronounce that. But, you can hear them like waxing philosophic, and they're like, I keep hearing you talk about Paris. That's so valuable. I keep hearing Paris.
I've never seen that movie, but I want to check it out.
It's good.
So in this noticing of like, man, like you keep, I hear you keep talking about Paris and how like central it was to the relationship. Like, do we write a letter to Paris? Like, how do we like?
Well, again, I think the core principle is get it through Broca's area somehow. So you can write a letter to Paris. You could be angry at Paris if you want to. You could be angry at the person that you met in Paris. You could be angry at yourself or longing for the moment. You could write to your foolish earlier version and be like, why didn't you note it? You can take it from any perspective. I think generally you want to get it through Broca's area, and you want to make sure that it's got emotional content in it. and is from the perspective that you're feeling most strongly. So if you hear somebody constantly saying like, man, it was so silly for me to have believed this, then we're kind of thinking of the self as foolish, and that earlier version of self as foolish. And we can write to that earlier version of self and either take care of them, or if it's helpful, you can castigate them a little bit. Again, I'm not encouraging people be like harsh to them, their earlier versions of themselves, but I want you to be real with what you're really feeling. And so, gosh, I'm sorry, another tangent here, but very often I find that therapists, if they ever hear a client say something negative about themselves, they rush to help them reframe that thought in a cognitive therapy kind of way, reframe that thought to be more positive. And I argue we've failed to explore what the thought is. Why does this person even have the thought?
Yeah.
What even is the thought? And so what I encourage all of my fellow therapists to do instead is chill out. We will reframe. Don't make it the very first thing you do. So if you hear something like, man, it was so silly for me to have bought into this narrative way back in Paris, a typical therapist is going to be like, no, it wasn't silly. Let's reframe that thought, and let's work to find a kinder way of talking to ourselves. I want to say, why was it silly? Okay. I hear what's silly about that. I hear the way that you were kind of pulled in by this. I hear the way that you're saying to me that feels really foolish, that it feels like you abandoned yourself, like you let go of the self. And I hear why you'd be so angry at yourself for that. Like, make sense of it, because the client believes it. The friend believes it. They believe this story. So you need to understand why they believe it. And you need to understand at the level that it truly makes sense to you. Then reframe.
100%, because I will say, when I have taken the former approach of just going straight for the CBT, like, let's reframe that. You're not silly. Like, let's look for the reasons why that's not true. They are so firm in that belief that they were foolish for thinking this way about this relationship, that it's just resistance. There's no way I'm getting through to them, and it's just not helpful. Like,
and it's just experienced as an invalidation.
Yes, 100. Yeah, it actually make things harder or worse, because it's like, okay, not only do I not believe you, so I'm like extra resistant towards like you trying to make me think any other way, but you're also invalidating that I feel this way on top of that. So like, we're really button heads today.
Right. Reframe second.
Yes.
That's my argument.
Yeah.
We're really trucking through our list here too. You wanted to talk a little bit about the grieving process. Is there anything more about the way that we grieve that feels important to touch on?
Well, I was thinking sort of about I'm trying to relate this like grieving process in relation to kind of the concept that you're bringing up of like sticking with an emotion and writing through it. And I wonder if that could be helpful to like going through like, the stages of grief, like depression, anger, bargaining, denial, all those, and writing from each of those places, I think could be really helpful. I don't know. I think that just validating yourself in the sense of like, this was something that was really important to you. Like, you don't need to downplay it and be like, oh, well, they were a jerk anyways, and like they weren't the one. It's fine. Like, I'm gonna put on my big girl pants and I'm gonna be the strong, independent woman, and like F them. Like, it's fine. No, it's not fine. Like, you thought this was gonna be your person at one point. And it's like, it's okay to like acknowledge how significant that relationship was. I think sometimes we try to like downplay how significant the relationship was in order to like protect ourselves.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's really well spotted. I love the idea of writing from the perspective of each of the stages of grief.
Mhm.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, U Chicago. I don't know if she was a graduate, but she definitely worked at, I think she worked at U Chicago. And I also really appreciate this kind of shout out of the way that we can get a bit ego protective and protective through narrative as well. I talk a lot about protective demonization. So right after a breakup, be like, nah, they were an asshole. I get why we do that. And I'm
Mhm.
not even against that being a useful tactic to some degree. Just know that that's what you're doing and know that that's not a truth about who the other person is.
Mhm.
It's your own way of, I need them to be an asshole so that it's reasonable for me to be away. That's the kind of the rationalization that's happening in the mind. If they suck, then I don't need them. But that
Right.
raised the idea that I needed them to begin with. And perhaps I'm just struggling with the idea that this did matter to me in the way that you describe, Allie. This did matter to me. It does hurt. I don't want it to go away. I don't want to feel these feelings. I do want them back. It seems easier to just to demonize them, but it might end up being harder in a slower kind of way.
Yeah. I 100% think that like subconsciously we feel like if we demonize them, then it'll be easier for us to like get over them. 100%. Um, uh,
I get it. I get why there's why we might want to go, you know what? Derek was an asshole. And I think there is some value to it. It's a way of kind of scraping your neurons off the other person. So I see its utility, but you are going to have to make peace with the fact that they were a human doing the best they could. Jillian Turecki talks about this in her book. Um, you sort of, you can't stay there. You can't stay in the land of they're an asshole and that's why I need to be away. Outside of, again, things like abuse and major traumatic or caustic experiences, but to just be like, he's so toxic, and then to get rid of him doesn't do the healing you need to do to engage them with humanity, to understand them through a human perspective and understand them for the flaws um, and best intentions that they may have had. I know that people do things that they shouldn't do out there. I think there are always reasons why, and we're never being an apologist for any level of toxic, abusive, manipulative, traumatic behavior in any way whatsoever. Um, but at the same time, I think a lot of people are doing the best they can, screwing it up along the way, learning as well as they can, and so are you, and so am I. Um, we need to make peace with that in a way that doesn't dehumanize them.
so let's say I've written my letters, I've burned them. I've been in talk therapy. Um, I've been utilizing my social supports. Um, I still feel lonely and I still want to date, but I don't feel like I'm completely over this person. I still miss them and I still like I have feel like I have love for them. Can I still date other people while I'm still missing my ex?
Yeah. Honestly, I think you could be 20 years into a marriage and still miss an ex or miss parts of them. And I think that can be a way of honoring the bond that you did have with the person. I think it matters what actions you take. And I think if you're in a position where you're not able to engage another honestly or openly, then I do think there is some cause to be a little bit more reserved in the way that you're dating and a little more honest with people in the way that you're dating. And that can happen. I don't like that it happens, but but it can happen where you think you're a little more, if there's such a thing, ready. And then you get out there and you're like, ooh, maybe I wasn't actually. So, I mean, those sorts of things do happen. Try to be on the lookout for them as much as you can. Try to be introspective as much as you can about where you're at in the process. But more than anything, just try to be honest with people. If you, let's say that you are somebody who does want to hop back on the apps pretty quickly afterward, just be honest about that with people. Let them know I'm just getting out of a thing, but I'm trying to get back into the dating world and get used to the idea of dating again. You can put that on your profile, and people can engage with it or not, and decide for themselves whether they want to participate. But I think honesty and transparency is most important. And I think early in a relationship, if you're still stuck on something, if you're still in a place where those reservations exist, I think you have to talk about them so that the other person can make good decisions for themselves, because they're trying to stick their neurons to you. They're trying to figure out if they want to, and a kindness that you can offer to them is to be honest and be transparent.
Yeah, I think it's important to take great care in having other people stick their neurons to you and vice versa.
Yeah.
let's take some care in that process, and just be transparent with where you're at so that they can make the informed decision as to whether or not they want to stick to you or not.
Well, if you want to get into a loving relationship, then you need to think of love as a verb. It's the thing that you do. And if you're wanting to get into a loving relationship where you were loving like a verb, then you need to start that way right away. It's not about what you're getting from the person. It's not about evaluating them. It's about giving, and giving in a loving kind of way. That starts small. Don't just like buy them a house on date 2. But like, it starts in small ways, but you need to begin giving little gifts. And one of the strongest gifts you can give is transparency and honesty. And if you think about love not as a feeling that you have, but a thing that you do, then maintain that from the first moment of contact that you ever come across somebody on, whatever dating app, all the way to the last moment of contact when you are eventually saying goodbye to someone. Love like a verb while entering, love like a verb as much as you can all the way through, and love while leaving in a verbic kind of way. You got it. You have a responsibility to utilize your actions for the greater good. To take care of yourself, but to take care of them as well. And that may mean that you have to take loving actions that could impede what your other goals may be. I really want to connect with this person, but I need to be honest about where I'm at. The loving thing to do is to be honest about where you're at so that they can make a choice and accept that that might mean that you don't get what you want.
100%. That was so beautifully said. Is there anything else that you want to say in this topic of healing from a breakup before we wrap up?
All of this is hard. Listening to this, trying this, it's not like it's going to be easy. This could take months if it was a really long or really deep relationship, or a particularly enmeshed one. That could be really hard. Even doing what I just said, loving like a verb, is really hard. It's especially hard when I'm feeling betrayed, when I'm feeling scared, when I'm feeling lonely, when I need something from you, or I feel like I do. It is so hard to turn my actions back into giving. And it's so hard to give to myself the kinds of healing that I need. All of this is hard. Every little bit of this is hard. You do not need to be perfect. It won't be linear. It won't be fast. It's okay. It's okay for this to be hard.
Yeah. Oh, and I do think there's this this saying that like, oh, if you were together for 2 years, it should take you like a year to get over the person. Like that's a myth. Like,
Yeah,
like
there's no science for any of that.
yeah, there's no like exact timeline for all of this. Oh, I very much enjoyed this conversation. Before we end today's podcast, of course, I do want to talk about the quote that's behind you, Adam. FOMO is the romanticization of the choice not made.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think we're always going to romanticize the choice that we didn't make.
Which is why we are so replete with FOMO.
Yeah.
Which we should say for any listener that doesn't know, FOMO is the fear of missing out.
Oh, yes.
And the longing that we might have for the thing that we didn't choose. But I think it can be helpful for us to remember that all we're doing is imagining some other path that we didn't take and romanticizing how great that path would be. It'd just be a path that we took, and then we romanticize the one that we did take.
Exactly. And a lot of times when we're thinking about the path not taken, it's way more glamorous and successful and wonderful in our heads than maybe it would have been. And you have no idea. This is all conjecture and fantasy in your head. And it's like the saying, the grass is always greener. Like, of course you're going to always think about the thing that you didn't do and think that, oh man, that would have been the better choice or whatnot.
We can go double quote, because I was just looking at my quote book yesterday and I saw I think a client gave me this, I'm not sure, but the grass is always greener where you water it.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a great podcast. Adam, thank you all for listening and joining us today. As always, here at Delve, we offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy. So reach out to us for a consultation at delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. Again, check out our wonderful Substack. Some juicy topics just like this one on there, delvepsych.substack.com.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you, and we'll see you guys next week.